Thank you very much. First of all, on behalf of you all, I would like to invite His Worshipful Mayor Roy Chamdal to light a peace candle. Thank you very much, Your Worshipful Mayor. May I please also invite the leader of the council, Councillor Ian Edwards, to light the peace candle. Many thanks.
जातश्चक्षुः सूर्यो यजायतं श्रोत्राद्वायुश्च प्राणश्च मुखादग्निरजायत.
Thank you very much, Ian Edwards, leader of the council. And finally, on behalf of you all, I would like to invite leader of the Labour Party, Councillor Peter Curling, please.
ॐ चन्द्रमा मनशो जातश्चक्षुः सूर्यो अजायतं श्रोत्राद्वायुश्च प्राणश्च मुखादग्निरजायत.
Thank you very much, Peter Curling. For all those who are gathered here today, please join us in our prayers to the God for righteousness, truth. Grant our Queen and her government, to our worshipful Mayor, Councillor Roy Chamdal, and our leader, Councillor Ian Edwards, and leader of the Labour Party, Councillor Peter Curling, and all those of you who are present here in position of responsibility for the guidance and for the benefit of mankind. We pray to the God.
हरिः ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवा भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिर्सेमहि देवहितं यदायुः. ॐ शान्तिः 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 सुशान्तिर्भवतु.
And finally, I would like to request all of you to join us in prayers for the peace of the departed soul of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, and may peace be everywhere, and wishing for the success in this opening session for the councillors of London Borough of Hillingdon.
ॐ द्यौः शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगुं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वे देवाः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिः सर्वगुं शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सामा शान्तिरेधि.
सर्वेषां स्वस्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां शान्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां पूर्णं भवतु सर्वेषां मङ्गलं भवतु. ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः.
Thank you very much.
So move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Tonight I have apologies from Councillors Allen, DeVille, Dillon, Hurangi, Makwana and Stead.
We have 2 sets of minutes to approve. I gather everybody must have read them. Are we agreed on that? Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Sorry, Councillor Lakmana.
I'm not sure if Councillor Peter Money's name was mentioned in the absences. He sent his apologies too. Thank you.
Agenda item 3. Any declarations of interest? There's no interest. Rapidly move on to 4. Well, first of all, I would just like to thank all the previous mayors. Everything that you've said that I'm going to enjoy, I definitely have. It is exactly what you've said. Thank you very much indeed. It's a wonderful and extremely humbling role. It really is. You wake up in the morning and you look at your calendar and you see the meetings that you have with residents and with organisations, talking about and listening to life stories. You know, we've been to a few care homes. We had Mencap and Halo, just to name a few. It really is a fantastic role. The citizenship ceremonies which I perform, being told I represent Her Majesty the Queen, well, that just blows you away. It just does. And then the other part is when they leave the Civic, they leave just over the office where I sit. So I open the window and listening to everybody, they come out with so much happiness and joy, and they're ringing up their relations. Now, it's eavesdropping, I know, but I hope there's not a law against it, but it really is, it's a fantastic part. I want to thank, we have Councillor Marathon Singh here, who has promised to do 12, there he is over there, Jagjit Singh. I don't know how he does it. He's challenged me and himself by doing 12 marathons in 12 months. And he's cheated because he's done 2 in the last couple of weeks. But he's, you know, if I had a hat on, I'll take it off. You know, he's raising it for my 2 charities, you know, and I've got nothing but absolute gratitude for you. And finally, hopefully with the restrictions easing, I think we still have to point out, get your vaccinations if you haven't had them, especially amongst our younger generation, which has been offered to now. Be sensible, be safe, and get your vaccinations. Thank you. We go into agenda item 5. It's no. Oh, sorry, I do apologise. I call upon the leader, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I am sorry that I need to follow your very happy announcements with a slightly more sombre message regarding COVID. And if I may inform Council, Mr. Mayor, that on Monday the legal restrictions that we have observed for many months come to an end, not because the pandemic is over, but because the government has assessed that the social and financial costs of those restrictions no longer outweighs the benefits. The rate of infection locally continues to rise, but not as fast as is typical in London. Since mid-June, we have seen a steady and consistent increase, not exponential growth. As of yesterday, we had an infection rate of 246 per 100,000 residents, and that is up by a quarter over the last week. But it places us 15th in London, whereas previously we have normally been within the top 3 or 5. About a third of our infections are school-related cases, showing that the testing regime within schools is working well to identify asymptomatic students and to limit further transmission. Hillingdon Hospital have informed me that they have 12 inpatients from northwest London in their care, with none on intensive treatment units. Less than 5 of those patients have had a double vaccination more than 14 days before admission. I cannot give the precise number because NHS data protection protocols prevents disclosure of that actual number when the total is less than 5. but less than 5 patients are required to have assistance and ventilation. And none of those having assisted ventilation have had a double vaccination. The vaccination of our residents has progressed well, and in the context of London, we have amongst the highest level of vaccinated residents, both first and second dose. However, compared to the national average, we are clearly lagging, although the gap is beginning to close. With our partners, we are continuing to work hard to get more jabs into more arms, but the level of vaccination hesitancy locally remains relatively high, particularly among the younger generations, and also, surprisingly, for the second dose. This may well change now that travel will be more accessible to those that are fully vaccinated. We must hope so, as the vaccine is the primary line of defence against COVID. And although the linkage between infection and serious ill health or death has been very significantly weakened, the consequences of high levels of infection locally remain damaging. The more that are infected, the more that we will be required to isolate, and this is beginning to feed through to create staff shortages within key services. As from next Monday, the Council is requiring staff to commence a phased return to former working practices that include flexible work. We have a duty of care to our staff and will be taking steps to limit the risk of transmission within the workplace, but we will not be making the wearing of masks mandatory other than in enclosed and crowded places. New risk assessments are being undertaken to determine safe office layouts and capacities within the new guidance, and new safe limits for our committee rooms are being worked out. The council chamber will return to its former layout. Mr. Mayor, I join with you in imploring residents to have both doses of the vaccine, and I very much hope all members are working hard within their community to ensure that that message is passed through. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Leader. Now we move on to the questions from Mr. James.
Yeah, thank you very much. First-time buyers, young families, airport hospitality workers in this area already hit hard by the COVID pandemic, now potentially face bankruptcy, forfeiture and eviction due to the current building safety crisis, which is happening in this borough. They need support. Will the council do the right thing, put its residents first and support the End Our Cladding campaign?
Thank you for that. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. James, for the question. Hillingdon Council and this administration in particular recognise the difficulties residents who live in private and potentially unsafe high-rise buildings face. We are committed to working with the government, building owners and residents to ensure safety standards are met in all these buildings. To that end, we have been actively working with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and the London Fire Brigade to do this. By way of background, fire safety in residential buildings is governed by both the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, known as the FSO, for which the London Fire Brigade is responsible, and the Housing Act 2004, which the Council's private sector housing team enforce. The FSO imposes duty on individuals in control of buildings, and the Housing Act imposes monitoring duties on local authorities to take enforcement action against those in control of a building. In respect of blocks of flats, the FSO only applies to the common parts, and the Housing Act applies to the actual flats and things such as and including the external cladding. The Council, as owners of a number of buildings that fall into this category, have already undertaken works to remediate their own stock and is continuing to do so where needed. For high-rise buildings in the private sector, we have dedicated resources to get a better understanding of the scale of the problem, and where specific cladding systems are identified, and have not been removed, or where there are other fire safety concerns, building owners have been contacted as a matter of priority. In cases where there is no prospect of works being carried out by building owners, the Council will use its enforcement powers if necessary, and we are actively progressing this work. In the interim, where the Council has become aware of high-rise buildings of concern, we have met with the London Fire Brigade and building owners to ensure that adequate risk assessments have been undertaken and that steps are being taken to make the sites safe. We have also asked that building owners regularly communicate with their residents to keep them updated on progress being made. Residents are entitled to request a copy of any risk assessment for the blocks they live in for further information. Now that deals with the background to this issue. On the question of who should pay for any remediation, what I believe to be the essence of your question, Mr. James, I think it is likely that the government will end up footing the bill, or at least the majority of it, and certainly in the short term. And I can assure you that we have already lobbied our local MPs, one of whom is sitting in this room, to urge them to press for an early and comprehensive settlement that allows the works to be carried out without the need to bankrupt the occupiers. Whether developers or owners of the blocks concerned should pay some or all of the costs is also a matter for the government to decide. As a result, I believe this Council's approach, which is a combination of both action and lobbying, is the best way to ensure our residents stay safe in their homes, something that signing a petition will do little to help. I hope you find the above response helpful, and it gives you some assurance that this Council is taking this matter very seriously.
Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 6, called the leader, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The recommendations in this report are not contentious, and I propose that they are taken en bloc. At section 1, detail is given of the 2 decisions taken under the urgency decision rules. Section 2, Council is asked to agree to waive the 6-month councillor attendance rule for Councillor Stead owing to ill health. As we are getting close to the next year's local elections, the recommendation is to waive the attendance rule up to that date. Section 3 recommends a single change of membership in a committee, and Section 4 proposes minor change to the terms of reference of the Pensions Board and more extensive change to that of the Health and Wellbeing Boards to better reflect the increasing strength of the partnership with our health colleagues. I move the recommendations.
Is there a seconder?
I second and formally reserve my right.
Councillor Curlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to, on behalf of the Labour Group, wish Councillor Stead well. He's actually one of my own ward councillors, so I've got a bit of a personal thing as well. So on behalf of the Labour Group, I'd just like to wish him well and a speedy recovery. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we'll definitely pass that on. Are there any other speakers? Is that agreed? Thank you. Go on to agenda item 7. Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 7 requests Council to adopt the revised local development scheme, which was approved by the Cabinet on the 17th of June. This sets out the timescales for the production of revised local plan documents in respect of planning. I so move.
Do we have a seconder?
Mr. Mayor, I second and reserve my right. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Is that agreed? Thank you. Move on to agenda item 8, Councillor Mills, R. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to ask a question of Councillor Goddard, the Cabinet Member for Finance. Would the Cabinet Member please advise the progress made in distributing additional restrictions grants to local businesses within the borough?
Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Mills for the question.
Perhaps I could start by giving some context here. So far, we have dealt with 12 different COVID business grant schemes, of which the additional restrictions grant is but one. Since March 2020, the aggregate grants administered and paid out within Hillingdon amount to £80.2 million. These are payments that have been made to 4,300 local businesses, with over 12,000 individual payments. This demanding but vital process has been administered and controlled by 2 dedicated teams drawn from within the Council's revenue service, with secondees and recently retired staff being deployed on a temporary basis. Additional support has been provided by our Exchequer team and by Liberata, who are our outsourcing revenues and benefits partner. Between October 2020 to June 2021, ARG payments have totalled £8.9 million. And while some authorities have struggled to disburse their funds, we have achieved a full utilisation of the allocation made available to us by the deadline. This will mean that we have met the required conditions to trigger a further allocation of ARG from a government-created top-up fund. The amount due to us is yet to be confirmed, but we believe that this will be in excess of £2 million. Mr. Mayor, I want to put on record my thanks and congratulations to the finance team, and in particular to the members of the revenues team, for their excellent work, dedication and professionalism in providing such an effective and efficient support to our local business community during a period of unparalleled challenge and difficulty. Thank you. Do you have any supplementary? Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the Cabinet Member will be well aware, the pandemic has been a real challenge for many local businesses. What additional steps and support do we as a council plan to take in order to assist the business community within Hillingdon?
Councillor Goddard. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Inevitably, our local businesses have suffered throughout the pandemic, and they deserve our wholehearted support. A vibrant, healthy and successful local business community is crucial in maintaining the very best conditions for our residents. Not only does it create an environment of prosperity, it creates employment opportunities for our residents, and, I might add, it will serve to limit our funding need from council tax. There are a number of ways in which we will look to support our business community going forwards. Firstly, we've exercised the maximum amount of discretion afforded to us in the allocation of business support grants. We have listened to the observations of local businesses and have used this discretion to respond to their concerns wherever we possibly can. Our successful distribution of funds, as I've already mentioned, will thus far trigger a further additional restrictions grant allocation, and we will similarly apply discretion wherever we can. We're also looking to build on Hillingdon's reputation as an attractive home for business, and we recognise that the provision of suitably skilled workforce is a key consideration. We will therefore continue to work with local institutions such as Uxbridge College to facilitate and provide suitable skills training to local residents. We're also currently looking at an opportunity to fund a skills development programme for the construction industry. We're also mindful of the need to see improvements in the transport links with the borough, as this will further enhance our attractiveness to businesses who are considering where to base themselves. We will therefore continue to make representations to the Mayor of London in this respect. We want to create opportunities for local businesses to benefit from contracts which are awarded by us, and I'm currently working with the procurement team to find ways in which we can maximise the uptake for local businesses of Hillingdon contracts within the framework of the current procurement rules. Mr. Mayor, these are important initial steps towards building an even more supportive and positive partnership with our local business community, and I'm certain that numerous benefits will accrue to our residents. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Goddard. Move on to 8.2, Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask this question. of Councillor Bianco, the Cabinet Member for Property and Infrastructure. The Council bought Packet Boat House and sold the flats to first-time buyers. Following the discovery of major building faults, all residents were moved out at council expense to privately rented properties while remedial work was carried out. Residents have still not been able to move back into their homes. The council have now approached them, offering to buy them out at an enhanced price, but one that does not buy them a comparable home, as house prices have risen more than the enhanced price offered. Will the Cabinet Member please inform Council if it is the intention to increase the offer to allow these residents to purchase a comparable home, or tell us what other options it is considering to compensate them? Thank you.
Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Duncan, for your question. Packet Boat House originally contained a total of 20 properties for shared ownership. However, one flat was not sold at the time, leaving a total of 19 shared owners. As you said, due to the extent of the remedial works required to be undertaken at Packet Boat House, which unfortunately were delayed due to the pandemic, the shared owners were placed in suitable alternative accommodation in the private rented sector. The council had made two commitments to these owners. Firstly, that it would meet the full costs of the essential remedial work and the costs of their suitable alternative accommodation, in addition to associated costs such as removals and storage. Secondly, that it would return shared owners to a flat and building which met current building regulations and other required legal standards. The council brought forward a buyback offer for shared owners. The initial offer was the original purchase price plus £10,000. However, in recognition of the unavoidable delays to the programme of works, together with further major work being identified, the council increased this offer in April of this year to the original purchase price plus £25,000, in addition to paying the reasonable cost of evidenced early mortgage repayment fees charged by the owner's respective mortgage providers, and on top of this, the council has also agreed to bear the cost of up to 12 months rental in the owner's current private sector property, so as to give them time to look for and purchase suitable alternative accommodation if desired. Based upon local market trends, the council considers this second offer to be a fair and competitive one. Of the 19 shared owners, 12, or 63% if you prefer, have either accepted the council's offer or are in the process of selling their flats back to the council. With regard to the 7 remaining owners, if they decide not to accept the council's offer, they will return to a refurbished flat that is fully compliant with legal regulations and standards as soon as the ongoing programme of remedial works is completed by early autumn.
Do you have a supplementary for that? Councillor Duncan.
I realise that this figure may not be available at this time, but I would like to ask how much this whole exercise has cost us, please. Thank you.
Councillor Bianco.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, due to issues of a legal nature, I don't want to prejudice the council at this time to discuss that. I'm happy to talk to you at some point, but not at the moment.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to 8.3. Councillor Egerton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is directed again to the Cabinet Member for Finance, Councillor Goddard. Detailed information related to the financial position of the Council is essential to ensure proper accountability and scrutiny by members and our residents. This is particularly the case with central government funding for local government so constrained. However, the detailed budget monitoring report to Cabinet this month has been reduced to only a shadow of previous versions. can the Cabinet member ask for future budget monitoring reports to Cabinet to provide the detailed information as in earlier months? Thank you.
Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Eggington, for your question. I might start by reflecting that perhaps being a shadow of one's former self, certainly something I aspire to, and maybe I'm not alone in this chamber, but never mind. It should be noted that as fellow members of the accounting profession, Councillor Eggington and I should, of course, pay close attention to the Council's budget monitoring reports. However, we do need to recognise that these reports should not be the exclusive property of chartered accountants, but should make key financial information readable, accessible and understandable to all our residents. I do agree with Councillor Eggington that this imperative is never more important than now, when all local authorities are compelled to address numerous financial challenges. One only needs to look at the sad predicament that our near neighbours in Slough find themselves in, having filed a Section 114 notice for bankruptcy a mere 2 weeks ago. Mr. Mayor, it is of fundamental importance that our financial information is comprehensive, clear and transparent for all. In this context, throughout my more than 40 years' experience in public accounting, time and time again I have found that less equals more where sound financial reporting is required. I freely confess that even with my experience, I initially found the reports daunting and inaccessible, if only for the sheer volume of material provided. What has therefore started is a process of refinement of our budget monitoring reports. This is still very much a work in progress, albeit that we have achieved a far more logical and easy to follow structure already. There will be further change, but I must warn Councillor Eggington that this is likely to be in the direction of further slimming down of narrative. We will only say something when there is something to say. I do recognise that Councillor Eggington is perhaps missing detail, such as the itemised capital budget tables, which are very voluminous and detailed. And I can assure him that these will appear, but on a quarterly basis going forwards. I must also assure members that in my judgment, the key information which has been included, now going forward, I beg your pardon, the key information going forwards is as it will be. I should add that our Section 151 officer, Paul Waymond, has confirmed to me that he has no comments as to or concerns as to the changes made thus far. He will, of course, be consulted as further changes arise. Councillor Eggington and I have worked together on other matters very constructively in the past, and I would therefore invite him to offer any specific proposals that he may have outside of this meeting. However, I must make it clear that I do not anticipate a return to the earlier style of reporting during my period of office. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any supplementary, Councillor Eggington?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note that the Cabinet member thinks that the previous report was daunting. If so, does he think perhaps he's in the wrong job?
Councillor Goddard. Imagine.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to respond to that. I am certainly in the right job. I have no concerns about that. As I said already, I have over 40 years of experience, but I do repeat the point that volume does not necessarily convey information in the most effective way. And so therefore I repeat my invitation that if he would like to come to me with constructive proposals, I am very happy to work with him on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard. We now move on to agenda item 9 and motions. I just want to remind everybody, we all know the rules and regulations. I don't want to play the schoolmaster. We know the times that you're allowed to speak, so if you could stick to the times, I don't really want to have to cut you off because I'm sure you've practiced your presentations right to the last second. So, Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, wasps, butterflies, beetles, flies, and bees, the wild and the honey kind. These are all pollinators, and they are vital for a healthy environment and a healthy economy. I'm pleased to move this motion tonight and encourage all members of the council to support it. In researching this motion, I've gathered information from NGOs, government reports, and other valid sources, as well as the most important source to me of all, my daughters, who earlier told me today how important bees are to make tomatoes grow, because food would cost a lot more if it wasn't pollinated by insects. This is true. If we don't have natural pollinators, the synthetic alternatives are much more expensive, and we would see a rise in food prices. Who here would not be alarmed by that, particularly as the pollinator population declines? Who also would deny that the council has a significant role in planning and influences businesses and developers to increase biodiversity and other environmentally friendly practices? As a council, we also have a significant role in encouraging environmental and biodiverse habitats and practices with our residents, using our marketing and officer capacity to raise awareness and to help give the reasons why we need pollinators and which ways those populations can be encouraged. My children learnt the information they did from a group coming into school, showing the effectiveness of raising awareness. In short, as a council, we must create a buzz about bees. You were always going to know there was going to be one pun in there somewhere, one joke in there somewhere. So, as well as urging the council tonight to support this motion that strategically helps us to use the resources we have and resources needed to raise awareness around promoting pollination and pollinators, I also want to take this opportunity to urge us all here as individuals, but also the public watching, to play their part in increasing populations. Individually, if we can keep a space aside in our gardens or other areas on our properties, such as pots on doorsteps or balconies, with wildflowers and other attractive plants, we can have an environment where pollinators can thrive. If we encourage family members, children, and other friends that we know to see the importance of bees and wasps and other insects mentioned, not to see them as a pest, but to get excited about the 250 different species of bees, including the honeybee. We normally keep these in hives, and I do understand that beehives can be a sensitive matter. Have too many hives with too few flowers, and the wild population of pollinators struggles. So we must get the balance. But with the expertise we have in the council, the officers and information available, I very much trust the officers here at the council to make the decision as to where the best locations are for pollinating spaces, as well as for active promotion of beehives. Our simple acts here tonight as individuals and also as wider as the council, with businesses, developers and residents, our raising awareness, our investment in this very important area will make a difference. It will support other work going on by other councils, other government authorities and the government itself. I confess I am not an expert. I do appreciate there are a number of different complications, but this motion here provides an opportunity for us to put forward something that is important for the continual future of not just the bees and insects themselves, not just our economy and country, but also our planet as a whole, as we continue to try and achieve something of not just natural beauty, but an area that we can be proud of in Hillingdon. This motion builds on what the council is already doing and encourages us to continue to invest appropriate staff capacity and marketing resources to increase so that future generations can avoid having the more expensive food costs or inadequate spaces of natural beauty that encourage important biodiversity. Please support this motion. I move.
Is that seconded? Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to second this motion. The motion before members tonight is about promoting the growth of bee and other pollinator populations in Hillingdon. As the motion says, we have seen a huge reduction in bee colonies over recent years, and this is something that we should all be very concerned about. Changes in climate, the environment and habitat available to bees and other pollinators have been material causes. Numbers of other pollinators, such as butterflies, are noticeably lower. I remember growing up in the 1980s in South Ruislip and recall spring and summer months when caterpillars were abundant and could be seen without looking for them. These days, I'd be hard-pushed to find a caterpillar without searching high and low for them. Walking around Hillingdon's parks and open spaces, I see fewer butterflies flittering amongst the flora. According to the latest butterfly conservation report available, butterflies have seen a sharp decline over the past few decades. And while some species have stabilised or have had some small recovery in numbers, populations remain low and endangered. Even the humble wasp is an accidental pollinator. We may not like them buzzing around when we're eating, out on a picnic or drinking outside in a local pub, but they can also be an invaluable carrier of pollen as they search for nectar on which to feed. Wasps are also integral to biodiversity. Adult wasps hunt spiders and greenfly to feed their young. Without wasps, we would be overrun with spiders and greenfly and other insects. Some months I've seen fewer of these as well. Council has passed a climate change motion and an action plan has been produced. However, Hillingdon Council can build upon this with the Bees and Pollinators Action Plan, encouraging residents, businesses, developers and the Council's own policies to make decisions that are pollinator friendly. As a councillor, I continue to work with the council officers to find ways to improve open spaces in Botwell Ward that I represent. And on a personal level, I have numerous plants on my balcony at home to, in my own limited way, feed and support pollinators in our borough. Members of the council will recognise that the council has taken some steps in this direction with no mow May and wildflowers along major traffic arteries in some parks. However, support of this motion tonight will show that Hillingdon's councillors recognise that there is indeed more to do, and the council will have a positive impact to further enhance pollinator populations. The bottom line, and simply expressed, is that without pollinators, we would not exist. I hope that all members will support this motion tonight and urge Hillingdon Council to do what it can to bolster and improve the numbers of bees and other pollinators in our borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sansapuri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, recently we have seen growing public awareness of the importance of the bees in our ecosystem. Unfortunately, this awareness has been caused by increasing concern about their declining numbers. 3 species of wild bee have been already extinct already. Almost 1 in 10 species are under threat, and about half of the species have been declined in numbers over the past 50 years. This is concerning because of their essential role as insect pollinators. 85% to 95% of our food crop rely heavily on wild bees, moths, and other insects to pollinate them. Without these pollinators, Friends of the Earth estimate it would cost 1.8 billion every year to find alternative ways to do their essential job. Instead, these pollinators add roughly 600 million to the value of UK crops every year. The decline of bees, therefore, a real concern for our food supply. Why are the bees declining? Urbanizations and changes to farming have led to the destruction of their habitats. Climate changes are also having an effect, and so is the use of pesticides and herbicides. Mr. Mayor, local authorities have an important role in stopping the decline. We have a responsibility as a planner and leaders to stop the damages to their habitats, to discourage the use of pesticides and provide the plants and habitats that enable them to thrive. As leaders, we must set an example and encourage appropriate action. Mr. Mayor, our motion presents a comprehensive list of credible actions to engage and encourage developers, businesses, schools, and residents to meet the challenges of declining bee population. It provides a clear action and leadership on this very important issue. Mr. Mayor, I support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The English poet William Blake of Jerusalem fame commented that the busy bee has no time for sorrow. Well, I'm pleased to report to Councillor Mavers, who clearly thinks he's the bee's knees of the Hillingdon Labour Group, that the bees of Hillingdon are most certainly busy and most definitely not sorrowful. And why would they be sorrowful, living as they do in one of the greenest boroughs of London? At the 2019 London in Bloom Awards, Hillingdon won 20 awards, including Best London Village, Park of the Year, and Common of the Year. I'm sure our green-fingered council staff and residents are doing everything they can to ensure a repeat performance at this year's awards. In addition, the council's annual Hillingdon in Bloom contest is currently open for entries. The deadline is the 30th of July, incidentally, for anyone watching on YouTube. And this much-loved competition sees hundreds of gardeners from across the borough competing for sought-after prizes. If this is not enough, we have just seen the impact of the planting of wildflowers across the borough as a result of the No Mow May initiative. This scheme has been enhanced diversity in Hillingdon and been popular with residents. 2 quotes from residents from my local Residents Association Facebook group attest to this, if I may quote. One resident said, "Well done to Hillingdon Council for scattering so many wildflower seeds and allowing the verges to grow. It's helping the bees and other wildlife." Another said, "The wildflowers have added something to our borough I have never seen anywhere else." Direct quotes on my local Residents Association Facebook group. Furthermore, residents in my own part of the borough have the beautiful and tranquil gardens at East Coe House Gardens on their doorstep. The gardens are a veritable oasis of flowers and bees which have provided a haven of calm for residents for what has many been a difficult year. Councillors in other parts of the borough will no doubt be able to point to similar floral displays in their own areas. This administration has a proud record of protecting and enhancing our natural environment, and long may that continue. Rather than seeking to advise us on those issues, perhaps the Labour members may wish to contact their party's leadership in our neighbouring boroughs, which Hillingdon residents have frequently mentioned are nowhere near our level of verdant greenery. Thank you.
Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion seeks to establish an action plan for bees and pollinators. I'm not quite sure where Councillor Maves has been for the last 3 months, while we're extensively consulting on the Council's Strategic Climate Action Plan, which was approved by Cabinet on the 8th of July. Hillingdon's forward-looking plan and ambitious plan to be net carbon zero by 2030 received positive feedback from the community. I would draw Council's attention in the plan to Corporate Commitment 5 to enhance opportunities for biodiversity across the borough, particularly in urban areas. We've already taken action, as has been referenced by others, with No Mow May, wildflower verges, leaving some grass longer in our parks, increasing the number of trees we plant. Our planning policies already take account of diversity and seek green walls and roofs where appropriate. And I would, of course, remind all councillors that we strongly support the Green Belt, which in itself promotes biodiversity. We already support bees and pollinators in a number of ways. There are council hives at the Rural Activities Garden Centre. There are 5 hives at various allotment sites. We provide an annual grant to the local beekeeping association. The Rural Activity Centre sells plants suitable for pollinators, as well as the planting of wildflower areas and the creation of diverse habitats. On climate change strategy and community leadership, I will just quote from 2 commitments in the report. I could have gone on for much longer, but I'm conscious of the times. Community leadership at C1.9 to provide dedicated online resource aimed at children, and at point 10 to develop a school's engagement strategy to promote and encourage positive climate and environmental action. So in contrast to the positive action this administration has already taken, and we will continue to take, the Labour group has taken its normal approach, which is, let's create some more officers, let's not explain who's funding them, but it will be council taxpayers at some point. Just for the avoidance of doubt, I know there was a change in leadership in the Conservative group earlier this year, but we do remain committed to sound financial management. We will not be creating lots of new officer posts, and will not be supporting this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do we have any other speakers? Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do want to thank officers for the work they continue to do to encourage biodiversity and also to work on the Climate Change Action Plan. I am in no way surprised that Conservatives didn't take the time to amend and show their detailed commitment to biodiversity and pollinating. A strategic plan is good in terms of climate change reduction, but it does not give the details that residents want. They've even had a chance to gloat on their successes, and which there are some, and I won't disallow them that opportunity. But what are they so scared in this motion that asks them to do more? Is the challenge too great? Is it too difficult? We have capable officers here able to do things, and having green space is not enough of an environmental policy. As we saw with this Climate Change Action Plan, which clearly lacked ambition, which clearly lacked the opportunity to use the influence the council has to ensure we had a carbon zero, carbon neutral borough by 2050. Again, there is a lack of ambition and a lack of commitment to the environment. I do look forward to, though, to seeing these ideas in the following budgets that come from the Conservative administration, who clearly rely on Hillingdon Labour to give them the ideas they need to keep up with the needs of residents. So I ask again, where is the ambition of the Conservative administration? Where is the ambition to take on challenging and complicated matters and put residents first? Residents deserve better, and there is better here on this side with the Labour group.
Right, we move on to the vote then. Voting for the motion? Show of hands. Thank you. And voting against the motion? Motion is lost. Now move on to 9.2. Councillor Curlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The issues around the Grenfell fire and the associated cladding issues are well known and in the public arena. However, what this has also uncovered is the absolute scandal around various building defects and unsafe buildings that pose a real risk to the lives of the residents that live in them. On top of this, the developers who built these unsafe buildings are demanding bankruptingly high repair costs from innocent leaseholders. So this is much more than a cladding issue, and it's much more than a high-rise issue. It's an unsafe building scandal. Councils of all political colours have made similar council resolutions, and Hillingdon should not shy away from joining them in the pursuit of our residents' safety. We should not underestimate the scale of the problem here in Hillingdon. Councillors Gardner, Farley, Bliss, Dillon and I all attended a protest at High Point Village in Hayes to support the residents there in saying enough is enough to Ballymore. However, there are many developments in the borough that suffer from the unsafe building scandal. Trident House, George's Court, the old vinyl factory, Drayton Garden Village, to name but a few. This means there are thousands of Hillingdon residents that are victims of this scandal. Thousands of our residents in unsafe homes, unable to sell them and move on, and being faced with extortionately high repair costs for defects that are not their responsibility. We're not talking about a few hundred or even a few thousand pounds, but hundreds of thousands of pounds. Being enabled to take out long-term loans to pay for these costs is not the answer. It is the perpetrators of this scandal that should pay, and the government should ensure that the victims are protected and the perpetrators pay. Whilst the Building Safety Bill is currently going through Parliament, it is clear that more work needs to be done, with more pressure being placed on the developers to take responsibility and bear the costs, and the government to legislate to protect innocent leaseholders who bear no responsibility for the unsafe state of the homes that they have invested in. The Labour Group believes that, as well as working with the government, we should join forces with other local authorities, with the LGA and anyone else, and we should support the 10 End Our Cladding Scandal aims. which will show clearly that Hillingdon councillors put their residents first. I therefore move this motion and urge all members to support it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Gardner, just for everybody's information, I've given dispensation for Councillor Gardner to deliver while sitting down because she has followed due process. Councillor Gardner.
Mr. Mayor, fellow councillors, as you know, I rarely speak at full council. I'd rather heckle some of the drivel that I hear. But I usually use my remit as an elected member to help individuals in crisis. I'm happiest doing that. However, on this serious subject, I must speak out, otherwise I'd be letting down the hundreds of residents that Councillor Farley, Oswell and I represent in the High Point Village development. Since the Grenfell disaster, many of the residents from all the buildings in High Point Village, together with the old vinyl factory and Trident House, have come to us for help and advice because of the fear they have about the homes they live in. We have read the pleas from the High Point Village residents asking for help from Ballymore, only for them to be ignored or for the residents to receive ridiculous responses from Ballymore, which I can only describe as inadequate, misleading and incredibly uncaring about the abject misery their cost-cutting for profit has caused the residents. These residents live with the fear that they may never be able to move or sell their homes. But their constant, and I want you to think about this actually, their constant and biggest worry is when they go to sleep, despite them supposed to be reassured by a waking watch, they tell us they are actually petrified if they do eventually go to sleep. They have no guarantee that they will ever wake up again. Think about that for a minute, because that makes me incredibly angry and very, very upset. As you know, my main advocate role within the council is to do all I can for domestic abuse victims. Now I feel that I'm doing the same for the victims of what I regard as corporate abuse at High Point Village, who, like the victims of DV, start each day not knowing if they will lose everything, including their lives. So let's put our residents first, and as a council, insist that Ballymore, who incidentally have the resources, the personnel and finance, do all the remediation work identified in the EWS1 report, which I haven't read in full, but there are others on here that have, and do it as a matter of extreme urgency. If the High Point Village residents and the others in high-rise units in the area had purchased or rented any other product or service which had subsequently been found to be dangerous, either the product would have been recalled immediately or residents would have been entitled to full compensation. Yet it seems to be acceptable to allow people, our residents, to live in properties that could literally kill them. I urge you to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Bianca.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I rise to move the Conservative Administration's amendment to this motion. As I said in my earlier reply this evening to Mr. James, this is a matter that this council takes very seriously. This council's motto is putting our residents first, and we do. What we don't agree about is how. I am positive that not one of us on either side of this chamber would want to find ourselves in the shoes of the councillors of Kensington and Chelsea that they found themselves in 4 years ago. And this administration, by virtue of the actions it has already taken and the ones it will take in the months ahead, fully intends to make sure that that doesn't happen here in Hillingdon. Councillor Curling, in his motion, quite rightly points out the very difficult position that many leaseholders now find themselves in, either as a result of steps being taken by building owners to replace these unsuitable cladding materials, or because works have not yet taken place and they find themselves living in potentially unsafe homes. I personally find it difficult to believe that any self-respecting developer, public or private sector, would knowingly specify or allow to be specified any material that is as highly flammable as this one turns out to be, just to save a few pounds. And I would guess that in some cases money wasn't even the issue, with the cladding being chosen for its aesthetic appeal. We on this side do not believe that there should be a blame game war waged over who pays, but rather that working collaboratively with both government and developers and building owners, an effective and efficient solution is found that allows for all the affected buildings to be repaired and for the people who live there to be able to continue to live there without fear of fire or fear of bankruptcy or eviction as the result of the costs of these repairs. The issue of who ultimately pays is a difficult one. Should it be the government, the building owners, or the leaseholders, or all three in some proportion? However, this is a decision for the government. Clearly, though, someone must meet these not insignificant costs and do it quickly to ensure there are no further delays in getting this vital work done. Whilst it is the responsibility of government to decide ultimately who should pay and in what proportion, in the short term at least, I think there's little alternative that the bulk of these funds comes directly from government. The Act that is currently going through Parliament needs to set out a clear timetable and responsibility, but most importantly, it needs to clear the path so that action to rectify these faults comes from the top down rather than being forced by those at the bottom, the flat dwellers, having to sue their landlords. This Council will continue to work with all its MPs, the MHCLG and local developers and owners to press for the right solution. Mr Mayor, we do not believe that the original wording of this motion is helpful, hence our amendment, which we hope will be agreed by both sides tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder to the amendment?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I
Councillor
second and
Edwards.
reserve my right. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, if I could just at this point remind everybody, and for the clarification of everybody in the room, we are now discussing the amendment which is set out underneath the bold type on pages 6 and 7 of the order of business. Those who have indicated to speak on the main motion, actually I think that's just you, Councillor Morse. If you wish to speak, you'll need to indicate again. There you go.
Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm a little bit obscure as whether I'm talking on the amendment or the main motion.
Just to clarify, we are now discussing the amendment.
The amendment, fine. What I notice about the amendment is what gets deleted. You make the whole thing totally ineffective. And I would take a few points. 9. Mental health support must be offered to affected residents. This is not a government issue, this could be done locally. But it highlights the character of the Hillingdon Conservatives. And I think I'm picking up that point first. I'll then go on to item 8, which you're so conveniently deleted. A fairer, faster process to release EWS1 form and fund is necessary. Now, an interesting part of this process, as you may not be aware, that people that were particularly actually in Ickenham, and some flats there, they weren't 18 metres high. Now, what happens is government guidance, something which you regularly break, you break strong government guidance, but government guidance was any building that wasn't 18 metres high, that didn't have to have an EWS1 form. However, the banks would go with it, but who wouldn't go with it? The underwriters. So apparently banks and mortgagors will not go ahead with the mortgage unless... So these people were comprehensively trapped. They were young people. You don't have another genius of activity. You have a stamp duty holiday. So all these people could not move in the stamp duty holiday. I agree this is slightly off some of the track of this thing. But these people...
I'm offering a little bit of leeway, but we can get to the point.
But this is still relevant. No, the motion talks about an EWS1 forms. So quite clearly, these people were severely affected. 4, social housing providers must have full access and equal access to the fund. Everything that's been done in the original motion was functional. And it's quite clear that the government has got disconnected from the public. And the people that are actually in need, and these people are actually in quite a level of desperation because I'm a pretty tough character, and I don't think I could handle the situation if I was facing the problems they're facing. Bankruptcy, and all of this is done because building safety standards were not maintained correctly, and it was handed over to private companies. And the private companies, if you read the reports based on Grenfell, they knew the cladding going up was combustible. So they actually knew what was taking place, and nothing was done. And therefore, it is key that councils have an involvement in this, because we're actually a protection for people.
That's your time up, Councillor Morse. Thank you for that.
Well, I can hardly see it, Mr. Mayor. Anyway, thank you for your tolerance, Mr. Mayor, but I'm clearly why this is an appalling amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Curlin.
Yeah, no, you'll come back.
Oh, at the end. No?
Councillor Edwards, who reserves his right.
Right, so Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We stand together as a council in support of our very many residents caught up in the cladding and safety issues that have risen after the terrible Grenfell fire. We have and will continue to press government to make these homes safe without cost to the leaseholder, and to enable them to get on with their lives in safety and free from the financial burden and worry. But I will explain why we believe the amendment is necessary. Some of the problems that need to be rectified appear to have been the consequence of poor building practice, and it is right that in those circumstances the developers and the builders should be held to account and should pay to rectify the problems. But in other cases, the builders and developers have been caught by the retrospective tightening of standards, and in these cases blame is not so clearly apportioned. Not all developers, builders and management companies can be tarred with the same brush, and so we cannot support every statement made in the opening paragraphs of the original motion. The second bullet point of the original motion opens government to join local authorities in having responsibility for resolving this problem, and that is clearly against this council's interest. It is a problem for government to fix and to pay for, not for us. And we do not need the endorsement of or partnership with other authorities or the LGA to be able to use the powers that we have and the resources at our disposal to support our residents. As should one expect of this Conservative administration, the Council has been quietly getting on behalf of residents. Our MPs have already been involved in this matter, and representation has been made to government and will continue to be made until resolution is found. Council and fire brigade officers met with Ballymore representative, and arrangements are being progressed with Ballymore to upgrade their fire detection system to replace the Waking Watch. The specific safety concerns of a representative of residents were raised with Ballymore, and these have been addressed, and officers will continue to monitor the circumstances. And officers have also discussed with the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government the funding applications submitted by the residents from this borough. Turning now to the third bullet point that we wish to delete, this administration is one of action, not contemplation, debate or lobbying, and only last week the Shadow Secretary for State, Communities and Local Government wrote to me asking that this council pass a motion in support of his lobbying of government. This administration does not lend the council's name in support of campaigns or externally promoted motions, and hence why we are proposing the deletion of the third bullet point. Let us be clear, we will continue to act on behalf of our residents. We stand together in this chamber in support of those trapped by the cladding scandal.
That's your time
and
up,
to
I'm
have
afraid,
their homes
Councillor
made
Edwards.
safe without cost to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Labour Group cannot support this amendment because we feel it significantly waters down the motion. We recognise that the amendment commits the Council to work with government, and we are grateful for that. But we do feel that there needs to be recognition of the disgraceful way in which developers are treating leaseholders who bought their properties in good faith and are now being treated as perpetrators rather than victims. We also feel that the 10 aims of the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign are sensible, reasonable and proportionate to the situation. Other councils of all political colours have agreed similar motions, including the commitment to support those 10 aims. So it's disappointing that Hillingdon won't be. I would therefore appeal to members on both sides of the chamber to cast aside the vested interests of the property development world and commit to putting residents first by voting against the amendment, and support the stronger commitment to not only work with the government but also to work with other local authorities and commit to supporting the 10 aims of the End Cladding Scandal. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think between what I said in answer to Mr. James' earlier question and what I said just recently puts our position quite clearly, as does what Councillor Edwards said. We do stand up for our residents. We put our residents first. It's our motto and we mean it. And nothing has changed in respect of this very difficult subject. We have lobbied government, we are lobbying government, and we are talking to all the parties involved to get this resolved as quickly as we can. We don't believe anywhere that signing this motion will get us any further forward. And that is for that reason we have amended it. But to suggest that none of these things listed, 1 to 10 or anywhere else, don't matter to us, would be misrepresentation. I move our amendment.
Right, we're going to vote on the amendment, so
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The requisite number of members have requested a named vote. For clarification, can I just confirm that you are voting for the amendment as shown on pages 6 and 7, against the amendment, or abstaining? Councillor Ahmad Walana.
For the amendment.
Thank you. Are you sure? Councillor Arnold. Councillor Barnes. Councillor Bianco.
For.
Councillor Birra. Councillor Bliss. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Chapman. Councillor Chubadar. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Curling. Councillor Davies. Councillor Dennis. Councillor Dott. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Edwards.
Absolute clarity, that is for.
Councillor Edgington.
Against.
Yeah. Councillor Farley. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Gardner. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Graham. Councillor Hensley. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Kaufman. Councillor Lakmana. Councillor Lavery. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Markham. Councillor Mathers. Councillor Melvin. Councillor Milani. Councillor D. Mills. Councillor R. Mills. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Morse. Councillor Nelson. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Oswell. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Prince. Councillor Sir Ray Puddifoot. Councillor Radia. Councillor Riley. Councillor Rodriguez. Councillor Sansapuri. Councillor Seaman Digby. Councillor Simmons. Councillor Singh. Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Sweeting. Councillor Tuckwell. Councillor Yarrow. Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That amendment is carried. That becomes a substantive motion to which further amendments can be moved, or we go for approval on that.
Any other speakers? Is that agreed? Councillor Gardner.
Councillor Gardner, you can only speak if you're moving a further amendment.
I want some clarification from something that Councillor Edwards said.
Well, that would be a point of personal explanation only if you feel that he's misunderstood something that you said.
No, I think he's misunderstood something that he said.
I think it was quite clear. I think Councillor Edwards made his point clear. Right, is that agreed? Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 10. Councillor Prince.
Everyone's talking. Do I go?
Fire away. Your time
Shall I
started.
just start? Yeah, I'll just talk over people, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When the council agenda was published, I received messages from colleagues asking me what I meant by rats and pests. Apparently, there was some doubt because of recent scandals involving politicians. Now, I couldn't possibly comment on those scandals in such a public place, but for the avoidance of doubt, this debate is referring to the small, often four-legged creatures, particularly of the rodent variety. And Mr. Mayor, in response to my rants about rats, I've also been called the Pied Piper of Hillingdon, which isn't exactly flattering, but nor is it flattering to yourself, as in the tale of the Pied Piper, it is all the Mayor's fault. But do not worry, I'm not here to lay the blame on anyone, for once. For the first 2 years of my term, fly tipping was by far the biggest complaint I received from residents. Yet just over 3 years in, I'm receiving more complaints about rats than ever before. I have submitted member inquiries, of course, but that does not achieve anything unless the resident is a homeowner or a council tenant. The council appears to offer no support or service for those who do not own their own home, who aren't a council tenant, or who are not on a qualifying benefit. This is a stark comparison to our neighbouring boroughs. I know my colleagues like to talk about how we fare to our neighbouring boroughs. Ealing Council offer a pest control service to all residents, Harrow too. Of course, there is a charge, but it is ultimately a service that the council provides. That gives trust to residents, particularly vulnerable ones. Yet Hillingdon's response is, go and find a private company yourself, and they can charge exceptionally high fees that many of our residents will not be able to afford. Mr. Mayor, rats and other pests do not require passports to move around. They're not subject to border enforcement. What happens on a private property today will appear in a children's playground the next. And it takes less than a month for a rat to reproduce, and they can have about 12 to a litter. That might not seem like a big number, but the rats of Hillingdon are getting busy and their population is growing exponentially. It isn't good enough for us to say that it's on private property, so it's not our problem. It isn't good enough to say it's up to the private landlord to deal with the rats. Some of our residents can't even get hold of their landlord. Mr. Mayor, the reason that this is an adjournment debate and not a motion is because this isn't about party politics. I don't want to see my residents living amongst rats and other pests, having their car wiring chewed through. This is part of a bigger issue too. Fly tipping is out of control no matter how often it's reported, but maybe I'll save that issue for the next council meeting. I hope that as a result of this debate, we can review our offer to residents and we can consider whether our existing offer is good enough to tackle the problem. They might be on my resident's property today, but they'll be on your resident's property tomorrow. Thank you.
Councillor Bratton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. An adjournment debate on rats, whilst a serious issue, is also a satirist's dream, so I will avoid commenting that in a room full of politicians, it is probably not the best place to mention that we're never more than 6 feet away from a rat. During the year to March 31st, the Council received 833 inquiries relating to rats and mice, approximately 1 complaint per 365 people who live in the borough. According to the British Pest Control Association, the COVID lockdown is responsible for an 80% increase in the brown rat population. This is due to several factors. The closure of restaurants and schools and businesses, where the rat populations were previously professionally controlled, has enabled them to breed with impunity. It has also encouraged them to migrate to new food sources, namely all of us, who were unable to leave our homes and thus created more rubbish than usual. As a female rat can reproduce every 6 weeks with litters consisting of 6 to 8 offspring, those pups become sexually mature at 5 weeks, at which point they can spawn their own broods. This means that a pair of brown rats can produce as many as 200 pups and 2,000 descendants in just 1 year. With the lack of predation and closed businesses during the pandemic, it is not surprising that the UK rat population is estimated by the BPCA to be anywhere between 10.5 and 120 million. Therefore, 833 reports in Hillingdon is not as bad as it might first sound. Of course, we are all aware of how fly tipping offers rats the perfect habitat to thrive and produce their 2,000 descendants per couple. The council has a finely tuned operation for dealing with fly tippers, but we as councillors and residents need to do our bit to avoid the problem in the first place by ensuring we follow the proper waste disposal guidelines. We are blessed in this borough to have maintained weekly refuse collections of not only general waste and recycling, but also garden waste, added to which, from May this year, food waste is now transported in bulk to be recycled via anaerobic digestion, which in turn creates biomethane gases that are fed into the national grid to supply homes and businesses with clean, renewable energy. The leftover material is a high-quality fertiliser for agricultural land. The general reduction in litter across the borough has been vastly improved by the volunteers who make up Hillingdon Litter Pickers, a bipartisan army of over 700 residents who regularly and spontaneously clear multiple bags of rubbish left by inconsiderate people. Once again, our fabulous waste services team provides bags to the volunteers and collects the tons of rubbish they have collated from areas that are not on the regular routes of the street cleaning teams. To support this great initiative, the leader of the council kindly donated over £2,200 from the leaders' pot.
Thank you, Councillor Brightman. Your time is up.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say, I do find the reason for bringing this debate to the Chamber a little odd, especially when there are so other many issues facing our residents today. One doesn't need to be a rodentologist in order to know that due to more people being at home during the global pandemic, there is a disproportionate amount of food being consumed at home, and domestic rubbish has increased, which in turn attracts rats. The best way to avoid this, of course, is not dropping food and making sure that all rubbish is secured so as not to appear too tempting for our rodent population. Mr. Mayor, it pains me to say we don't live in 1284 and our town is not called Hamlin, so we were unable to hire the piper who would lead the rats away. The London Borough of Hillingdon do have systems in place to deal with infestations, and with the just over 800 inquiries received in the year ending the 31st of March 2021. The council has an appointed pest control contractor and provides free pest control to residents aged 65 and over. A visit will be made within 2 days of the contact centre receiving the report. In some cases, there may be a need to conduct several visits to manage the infestation. The council has a variety of legal tools to help us with curbing bad rubbish management, from enforcement orders, enforcement orders for people not to leave unsecured waste or other items which may cause an infestation, to the Environmental Protection Act, warrant of entry notices, FPNs, fixed penalty notices of up to £5,000, and the Prevention of Damage by Pest Acts 1949. Mr. Mayor, I'm not too sure what the Labour Party are hoping to achieve this evening by tabling this debate. I have come to surmise that there may be some hidden code in tonight's debate, and have concluded that as the Chinese Year of the Rat ran from 2020 January to February 2021, they are somehow making a coded reference to COVID-19 and the origins of its outbreak. I'm not sure what we can do as a body to stop this growth in population of rats that has not just happened in our borough, but across the nation and indeed across the world. Thank you.
Councillor Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight some of the Council's achievements in respect of the ongoing problem of rats and other pests. And in doing so, I commend our staff who oversee the Pest Control Service, a service that is available to eligible residents in Hillingdon that encounter problems with pests inside their homes and in their gardens. One of our biggest causes of infestations is food waste, and in this area we are going further. Our commitment is shown by the recent launch of food waste recycling with an investment of £485,000 in a fleet of new vehicles. Approximately 44% of general waste is made up of food waste, And with the introduction of our outdoor caddies with their click-locking mechanism, we can ensure rodents are prevented from tearing open bags, preventing new incidents, as well as continuing to deliver on our pledge to protect our local environment. Mr Mayor, if I might touch on enforcement, the Council has invested nearly £3 million in upgrading the borough's CCTV portfolio, with mobile CCTV units also available to be deployed at hotspots, resulting in a range of tools that council officers can call on to investigate vital evidence. This enables them to prosecute or issue fixed penalty notices for the crime of littering and fly tipping, which we all know can attract rodents. Finally, Mr Mayor, where opportunities for improvement arise, the contributions of members is of course invaluable, as shown previously when the Policy Overview Committee, chaired by Councillor O'Brien, undertook a review on local pest control services and the impact of waste management in Hillingdon. The committee looked at the Council's roles and responsibilities for pest control, as well as proposals for the future, and highlighted the simple message that poor waste management contributes to greater pest numbers. They proposed how our waste management service could be developed and how education could be used to improve matters as part of 10 recommendations made to the Cabinet at the time. Formal committees such as the select committees are where matters such as this can benefit from the advice of, and experience of experts, often leading to real outcomes and the enhancement of our services to residents. This is where they should be discussed, rather than this 15-minute limited speaker debating session we have before us this evening. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that. We allowed 5 speakers. Look on the Councillor Nelson. If she indicated to speak, yeah? Yes, Councillor Nelson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council. Many of our residents have complained to us about the rats infestation across this borough. Some of it is due to the continuous littering, fly tipping, rubbish dumping, unkept gardens, hoarding, lots of homes being refurbished where the dumping of unwanted household items being dumped around the borough. It is not easy for our residents living within this sort of environment. Statistics show that rats infestation have increased by 42% during the lockdown. Some examples. A resident in Simpson and other area in my ward have complained about the rats in their locality. The residents are afraid to go out in their gardens or even their front door. Even children are scared to walk as they are afraid of the rats running around. I also suffer from the rat invasion. I had to call out the RAC as my car would not start. To my surprise, when the RAC attendants opened the bonnet of my car, they found that the padding was eaten and the rat have built a nest under the bonnet. So this also have highlighted the problem around our community. Residents has informed us that they have called out the pest control, who on investigation found out that the nesting was coming from a resident hoarder. They also said that they see rats coming up from the gullies under the road. She said that she has spoken to neighbors and it's a problem in the whole community that they are experiencing. I confined my daughter to the living room, she said. I wouldn't go in the garden after seeing a video of them jumping. I wouldn't open the windows that I know there are gaps that they can still get through. This is residents speaking, what's happening to them. As a result, the rat population are likely to move further afield to satisfy their need for food sources, and this in turn is likely to cause more sightings. It's been absolute hell, the worst time of my life. My husband and I have both suffered hell due to stress. The smell also is horrendous. We know that rats often look for somewhere warm at times. At this time of the year, but residents feel that their complaint is not being taken seriously. Some residents are unable to pay for pest control due to financial problem or lack of resources. It's not good for their health and well-being. It's a health hazard. Transmission can include Wells disease, a bacterial infection
Thank you
which
very
can
much,
cause
Councillor
chills
Nelson.
and headache
Your
to
time
people.
is up. Thank you.
We are calling on the council
Thank you,
to look
Councillor
in ways
Nelson.
in helping our residents.
Thank you, Councillor
Please
Nelson.
listen to our residents
Thank
and
you,
let's
Councillor
work
Nelson.
collectively
Thank
to
you,
solve
Councillor
this
Nelson.
problem.
Thank you. That was a very lively debate, and on that, I formally close the meeting. Thank you.